All right, so this is our first panel, Legislation and Litigation, Approaches to Accountability for Social Media. As we all know, this was once a novelty. Social media has infiltrated nearly every corner of our lives, even digital media that isn't expressly social media borrows the designs and practices refined by social media companies. Through their reach, these companies have gained tremendous social and political power. They can be a source of connection, information, and inspiration, but they also have introduced serious societal challenges. We will spend much of this Congress diving into the research on some of these issues, along with all the risks and benefits that technology poses to childhood. Yet, we should also be considering how to act on the information all that research provides. There is an ecosystem of advocates, legislators, regulators, and lawyers trying to put research to practice, leveraging public policy to address the extensive problems with social media researchers that they have identified. This panel will share the insights learned from some of the leading voices trying to mitigate, moderate, and remediate the potential harms that social media poses to today's youth through legislation and litigation approaches. Together, our panelists will discuss how different strategies intersect with one another. I'm going to encourage you not to agree with each other. And how they're using scientific evidence to support the work that they're doing on policy. And with that, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to introduce you and we're going to get started. Hi, so nice to see you. All right, we don't have Matthew Bergman, but we do have Gretchen Peters. Gretchen, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit more? You have about a minute, and then we'll start with questions. We'll go down the road.
Okay, this is on. Okay, so I'm going to just start with a story. I'm a recovering journalist, and I wrote a book about the heroin trade in the Taliban, and I turned that work into doing research on organized crime networks and how they end their supply chains. And I was doing work about 11 years ago for the Elephant Crisis Fund. We were hired to map the supply chains that were moving elephant ivory from sub-Saharan East Africa to mainly to consumer markets in East Asia. And what we found, nobody could figure out why all of a sudden there were 25,000 elephants a year that were being poached. Nobody could figure out what was driving it, who was behind it. And what we found was that the ivory trade had moved online. And had you asked me in 2015, 2016, where do you buy elephant ivory online, I would have said the dark web. In fact, it was on Facebook. And so we started doing research on what happened. And once we started looking for elephant ivory online, it was really hard to find. You had to put in search terms like buy elephant tusk. And then like 20 pages would come up. And then the algorithms would offer us more. And then after a couple of weeks, they started offering us baby monkeys. And then after a few weeks, they started offering us young girls. And we just went down this rabbit hole. And that's how I got involved in this, kind of by accident. And with every passing research project, we were sucked down into deeper and darker holes. And for a while, as researchers, criminologists, we just met and were like, man, this is really terrible. Somebody's going to have to do something about this. And then one day, finally, we were like, shit, excuse my French, we're going to have to do something about this. And that's why we founded ACCO.
Your story reminds me a little bit of Imran Ahmed, CEO and founder of Center for Countering Digital Hate. Welcome.
Hi, it's really great to be here. So my name is Imran Ahmed. I'm British as well, as you can tell. I'm the CEO, I'm the founder of the Center for Countering Digital Hate. I set up CCDH. Well, the work started about 9 years ago. It's about 9 years and a month since my colleague Jo Cox, who was a 41-year-old mother of two and the Member of Parliament in the UK for Batley and Spen, was shot, stabbed and beaten to death by a far-right terrorist who'd been radicalized online. And the question I set myself was, how does that happen? How does someone become so inculcated with lies, conspiracy theories, and the hate that's driven by those lies that they would go up to an innocent young woman and murder her? And when we started looking at the bad actors, taking it to the platforms, what we realized was that we didn't have a bad actor problem, we had a bad platform problem. And so CCDH was set up as a way of bringing the evidence that I'd discovered in that 2 years into a bigger, to the public, to lawmakers, to the advertisers who comprise over 90% of the revenues of those platforms. And people came along to me and said, look, it's not just a problem about identity-based hate or extremism, it's also a problem with kids' mental health. It's also a problem with public health disinformation. I mean, CCDH launched in September 2019. What happened a few months later? The pandemic. And we're now an organization with offices in London, Brussels, LA, and DC that tries to drive legislation, regulation, and advertiser behavior to try and hold social media companies accountable.
Thank you. And you have a beautiful baby who was on our last Zoom, who we all enjoyed meeting. And finally, Alix Fraser, Vice President of Advocacy at Issue 1.
Thanks, Kris. It's wonderful to be with you all, especially with this great panel. I'm sad Matt couldn't be here, but Gretchen is a fantastic last-minute addition, literally. And don't worry, Imran and I have disagreed many times, especially when it gets to come to the topic of soccer and his Man United love and my Arsenal support, so we don't have any problems there. So I represent an organization called Issue 1, which is a democracy reform organization. So you might be wondering, why am I here talking to you all today? And part of the reason is that we came to this work of tech reform a few years ago to try to get to the bottom of how the issues of the information environment are affecting our democracy. We started to go deeper and deeper into the layers of it and discovered the implications for children was at the center of this fight for a lot of reasons. One is that the future of our democracy in this country and all the democracies that many of you come from and represent are going to be determined by the fate of that generation, and how social media, technology, and information flow through them is critical. But also, we've thought this is the center fight, the first real battle when it comes to policy, politics of fixing this problem. And we set up this thing called the Council for Responsible Social Media, which Imran is a member of and many others, to try to bring an eclectic group of people from all kinds of sectors, ranging from former politicians, advocates, parents who've lost their children to social media, to also academics and many others. And so that's how I come to this work.
Pretty impressive panel, right? Okay, so now we're going to ask them some hard questions. You did a really nice job of introducing yourselves and the organization you work for, what brought you to the work. But now I want to dig into a little bit about why you chose the particular angle on this that you chose. In other words, are you taking the litigation panel, the legislation panel, the reform path? There are so many different ways to come at a problem this big that I'd like you to talk a little bit about why you landed on the method you landed on and why you think it's a winning method. And I'm going to start with you, Alix.
Yeah, thanks, Kris. So great question. And again, Matt would have been a fantastic person to talk about the litigation piece of this, and Gretchen will have a lot to say undoubtedly. But we at Issue 1 come from this lens of the only way we fix things societally in the end is through law. And Gretchen in her earlier talked about a place that has laws to actually inform and regulate and oversee technology. We don't have that here. We don't have that in any meaningful way when it comes to federal legislation in the United States. There's a lot of great stuff at the state level, a lot of experimentation, a lot of which has been sued by the platforms and blocked. But the bottom line is that we don't see any pathway to long-term fixing this problem, just like we saw with any other industry that's caused mass harm, whether it be tobacco, opioids, or others, without federal legislation that will stand the test of time.
In those other examples, those were long fights, decades long, generations long. And I worry that we're in the beginning of one of those long fights here too. Thanks for sharing that. Imran, how about you? Why are you in the lane you're in?
So, forgive me, I want to work from notes. I woke up this morning in Geneva and I only got into DC about 2 hours ago, so I am very tired. So, if I go back to the thing that I realized when I went to see the platforms, I actually went to see senior executives from those platforms in 2016, 2017, and 2018. I took them the data I was finding on how bad actors were weaponizing their platforms to spread the drip of disinformation that recolors the lens through which people see the world. how social media was re-socializing our offline world and was increasing polarization, increasing extremism, and creating real threats to our communities, to our mental health, and to our national security. But they didn't want to do anything about it, and I couldn't understand it. I don't think the people necessarily are malignant, but it's because it's so damn profitable. So let me work through the logic very simply for why we have the model that we have, and in doing so, I'll explain what the model is. First of all, addictive, malignant content is selected by algorithms for display to more people because it is profitable. It's profitable because it keeps people on platforms, and that's fundamentally how their business model works. Time on platform multiplied by number of users multiplied by the cost per ad. Second, fundamentally, the fiduciary duty of any executive in a private company to their shareholders is to maximize profits and shareholder value. If they don't do that, they get sacked. Third, therefore, the notion of self-regulation is delusional. So how do you fix it? The way that we've always fixed what economists would call negative externalities, so the costs that companies that otherwise produce good things impose on the rest of society. We ask them to share the burden of those costs too. And so how do you create costs for social media companies for when they cause harm? One way is regulation. I was the first witness for the UK's Online Safety Act 5 years ago. That became law 2 years ago. And just on Friday, I was talking to the chief executive of Ofcom, the new regulator there, as they start to bring those costs to bear. Now, America doesn't regulate a lot, but it loves to litigate. And so the second way is litigation. Now, to do that, we'd have to change something called Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act 1996, which Alix and I are, passionately working on right now. And Matt would tell you about how it's impeding his capacity to bring those lawsuits on behalf of the bereaved parents of dead children. And the third way is, well, look, you can impose new costs or you can reduce revenues. So, of course, we can go and speak to advertisers and show them the evidence. Do you think Disney wants to advertise next to eating disorder content? No, it doesn't. And so that's another way in which we can create real costs. And by doing so, we can create real disincentives for the production of those harms in the first instance. It is a rational, cold, systemic economic analysis that sits at the heart of what we do and why we do it.
You're pretty aligned so far, Alix and Imran, and I have a feeling, Gretchen, you are too, but if there were any
if you'd like me to disagree, I don't like his shoes.
I wasn't going to mention it,
Okay.
but yeah, the shoes are...
And he's got no tie, which I
He's not wearing Tevas. Gretchen, anything you want to anything you might disagree on with the first two panelists, and then your own particular angle on this?
I wouldn't disagree with them as much as to add a couple of extra thoughts, which is that what we see today with social media companies in terms of U.S. law, and in particular Section 230, is a total departure from the norms of literally centuries of tort traditions. Normally, and still today, any brick and mortar company in this country is under what's known as a reasonable duty of care to keep people safe on their premises. This is why malls have mall cops and nightclubs have bouncers. If somebody takes a child to a hotel and rapes a child in a hotel, that's a horrible tragedy, but you can't necessarily blame the hotel. But if a hotel becomes known as a place where child prostitution occurs, it can be shut down. It can be held liable for not keeping people safe on its premises. Same if a nightclub gets known as a place where lots of drug dealing occurs. However, platforms like Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok are teeming, literally have far larger amounts of illegal conduct occurring, and their systems, the design of their systems amplifies and spread these problems, and we know this, and yet they're not being held accountable. And so in my view, in the United States right now, we have a complete regulatory and legislative branch failure. I would go so far as to say massive levels of corruption are in fact occurring, and we need to address this as a country. I'm so despondent about it, I've moved to Europe so I can work with the Dutch Foundation in a place where they actually have laws, and they're actually going after tech companies, and they're actually enforcing on them, as opposed to what happens in this country. It's a disgrace. These are our companies, by and large, that are doing this. And it is a complete departure from our norms, and is, I don't think we should be tolerating it any longer.
So you've done a good job of highlighting where laws are helpful. Litigation depends on laws. Laws sometimes depend, or I should say litigation also sometimes depends on expert witnesses and evidence. So we've talked a lot about what's been tried so far. Now, here it is. It's the middle of 2025. We're sitting in Washington, D.C. You've talked about democracy, bottom line, profit, scale. Where are we right now, and what are we likely to see happen in the next 6 months, 18 months, 3.5 years? I mean, it is, in some ways, an unprecedented moment of concern on the part of thought leaders, academics, parents, of it's only coming faster. It's only seeming more nefarious when we think about AI, for example. What are you thinking about in terms of remediation, mitigation, litigation? Where do you think we're all headed?
So I'll start from the lens where I sit, right, which is here in Washington, D.C. We work on trying to pass laws here in Washington, D.C. And I'm going to take a step back to last year to tell a little bit of a story. So the first thing is to understand where the public is. I think you're all here. You heard a lot of the great comments. Your comments in particular, Kris, fantastic opening to articulate the consciousness of the average person, the average parent, the average citizen. We get it. We understand this is a really serious problem. I think the nuances of that are very, very specific and different for different folks. But the bottom line is 90% of Americans know that there's a major problem and that we need to regulate technology, period. The story I want to share is this fight we had over the last several years to pass this bill called the Kids Online Safety Act, which had, we worked with Children and Screens, a lot of other folks are in this room, and this is a bill that had 90% approval rating by the American people, 90%. And somehow we got it to pass the United States Senate by a vote of 91-3. If we tried to name a post office after Kris, more people would vote against it, unfortunately, than that. But yet, we didn't get a vote in the House of Representatives. Why is that? The reason is that the big 6 tech companies have one lobbyist for every 2 members of Congress. They spent over $60 million in lobbying in Washington last year, and that's just the official numbers, right? We're not talking about the ads. We're not talking about a lot of the other things, the darker money, the politics, the independent expenditures, all this stuff. And then the coup de grace. In October, so we passed this bill in, I think it's early August. We have a short window to get through the House Representatives. We knew it would be a lame duck play. For those of you who don't know, that's when the elections have happened, we have a few months left to pass the last pieces of legislation. And in October, Meta announces a $10 billion data center in the state of Louisiana. And who happens to reside in the state of Louisiana? The Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader. So there's no vote. There's no bill, and that's where we stand. However, the will of these parents, if you've met any of these parents who've lost a child to this, I have 2 beautiful young daughters, and I know that the force it would take to recover from that, I can't even fathom, but this is what we've seen, these parents, these advocates, and a lot of other partners in this room. So that's where we are. We're going to continue to fight, and I believe it will happen eventually. It will happen hopefully this Congress, but that is where we are in the fight in Washington, D.C.
Great, thank you for that recap and going backwards and bringing us up to where we are with COSA now. Imran, how about you? What do you think?
So, and if I was to look at progress against the 3 types of costs that I talked about, so regulation, litigation, and advertisers. So when I started CCDH in September 2019, there was no regulation anywhere in the world. In fact, the US's Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act 1996 So just to explain to anyone that doesn't know what Section 230 is, it's really important that you do, because this is going to be one of the biggest fights that we have in the coming years. Section 230 says that if you have a website and someone else writes something on that website, like a comment underneath a news article, you aren't legally liable for that comment. But what if you don't produce content? What if you just take the comments and you algorithmically reorder them into mosaic that tells a different picture? Even then, you're not liable. Even if that causes a terrorist attack, it radicalizes someone, even if it causes a child to believe that it's normal to cut themselves if they hurt inside, there is no circumstance in which they can be held liable under Section 230. And there are lawyers who are exploring ways around it, but at the moment, we've never been able to penetrate that shield. And it is unique to social media companies. There's no other industry. And when a law has been in place for 30 years, it doesn't just become legal impunity. They believe that they have moral impunity too. In fact, they get angry when you say, you should be ashamed of yourselves. You should be, why aren't you upset about this? Why aren't you angry yourselves? They say, because it is a fundamental human right. That was actually the same law the US persuaded Europe to take up as well under the e-commerce directives of 2000. So when I came to start CCDH, there was nothing anywhere in the world. We now have regulations in place in the UK, the Online Safety Act. Again, I was the first witness, and we got that through 2 years ago. We have the Digital Services Act in the European Union, and my office in Brussels is talking regularly to the Commission, which administers that, urging them to take their first actions. In Canada, we've got the Potential Online Harms Act, which we hope to see the new government promulgate in the next couple of years, and we're opening an office in Ottawa to try and encourage that through. But the problem that we've got in all of those jurisdictions is actually it's the United States government right now, and in particular J.D. Vance. And it's, it really brings me no pleasure. It makes me really sad to say this, that the first speech that he gave in Europe at the Munich Security Conference was to say, don't you dare enforce your laws. And I know, because I speak to the British government, the European governments on a regular basis, that there is enormous pressure being put on them, saying you won't get trade deals if you enforce your laws that would protect your children, your citizens, from our companies. And that's really shameful. But we are fighting back against that, and what we hope to do is continue to extend the regulatory progress that we've made. Then let's take the US and Section 230. Now, when I moved here in June 2020, everyone that I went to on the Hill told me, if I talked about 230, the meeting was over. Everyone told me it was impossible that change would happen. But everyone also told me they thought it should happen. And when that happens, it tells me that I need to ignore the people, the hundreds of people who told me that it was impossible the change would happen. Because there is so much unanimity, there's so much certainty that something needs to change, that inevitably change will come. We just have to build the movements, the advocacy, and then find the opportunity. And when that moment comes, when we do get Section 230 reform, I promise you, those 1,000 people that have been telling you right now that it's impossible that change will happen, they'll be writing op-eds about how it was inevitable that it was going to happen. And then finally, the advertisers. Really interesting, we've made progress there. I can tell you for sure that I've cost social media companies tens of millions of dollars in advertising because of the research that we've done. How do I know that? Because they sued us for it. So X Corp sued CCDH 2 years ago in California, asked us for $10 million, which would have made us bankrupt, saying that we'd cost them $100 million in advertising because we'd done research showing that when Elon Musk took over X, there was a tripling in the use of the N-word on that platform, the most offensive term you can use for an African American. There was a substantial increase in anti-Semitism, in misogyny, in anti-LGBTQ+ rhetoric. It caused advertisers to flood away from that platform, and he blamed us and he sued us, and we beat him. So they're fighting back. But now that one of the problems with Elon Musk having got involved in politics is right now, Jim Jordan and the FTC are actually investigating non-profits to try and see whether or not whether they're trying to investigate them even though they have no enforcement powers over non-profits under the FTC Act. Because what they want to do is try and push people away from holding these companies accountable. So while we're making progress, there are nevertheless substantial barriers in the way.
Gretchen, you were a journalist. I couldn't help but notice in June that we intervened in Canada with a threat around their Canadian digital services tax. We have many colleagues here from Canada today. And I worry that where other countries have made some forward progress in looking at how to ask platforms to share and contribute back to society, that the US not only has laws, but we're even asking other countries to, as you point out about the vice president, say maybe you could stop enforcing those laws. I don't want to, we're singling out, but I don't mean to single out. It's like when a country, whether it's the US or another country, says to another country, hey, you passed a regulation, you're enforcing something, could you rethink that? Could you do that differently? Are you seeing that in other places around the world? And are you seeing it go the other way? In other words, we've seen where people are saying, don't regulate. Have you seen where countries are aspiring to be like each other, aspiring to have a tax, aspiring to regulate, to put teeth in regulators so they can do something to protect kids?
I think we're seeing regulators and courts start to take action in Europe. They move slowly. The courts there move slowly. I think I've been a little bit disappointed in some of the actions we've seen out of Ofcom in the UK. I also work on an advisory group there. And so we're frustrated a little bit with the pace at which reforms and enforcements are happening. We're certainly seeing some interesting proposed laws, as Imran mentioned, coming out of Canada, Australia as well. There's some interesting proposed legislation coming out of Japan, potentially. I was down in Brazil a few weeks ago, which is their Supreme Court is looking at beefing up their laws, and Brazil is actually the country in the global south that, in my view, has done more enforcement against tech companies than almost anybody else. So I think there's some really interesting trends. And again, just to go back to the work that I'm doing with SOMI, I think there's a really interesting emergence of foundations in Europe. In Europe, the laws are that a nonprofit foundation has to manage the claimants because they want to try and avoid the incredibly costly litigation that occurs in the United States and the UK and the sort of ambulance chasing culture, so it has to be handled by a nonprofit. But there are now 66 nonprofits, foundations around Europe that are designated as qualified entities. SOMI is one of them. About 5 or 6 of them are going after tech companies, mainly under GDPR. SOMI is the only organization we're going after X for hate speech, for example. We're using some of Imran's research in our lawsuit. We're going after Meta for AI violations and violations of the Digital Services Act. And we're going after TikTok for addicting children. So to some extent, those private sector, those civil efforts can complement or potentially help to, well, we can dovetail off of what regulators are enforcing on, but we can also, we can move in civil spaces if the governments are under pressure from the United States not to take action. It's also an opportunity, I would say, both for foundations to get involved in these nonprofit foundations in Europe, but also investors. The foundation can't make money, but investors can actually invest in these litigations in Europe and actually receive returns, which can then drive further actions in this space.
Okay, great. You're in a room with scientists and researchers who have created a body of work, continue to create a body of work that they hope is used for good, that creates change, we act with it, act on it. I'd love to hear you give examples of where it has been helpful to rely on evidence that existed, or where you really wish there had been more evidence. Imran, for you to conduct your own research as the CEO of a large nonprofit must be kind of challenging. You're not at a university. You don't have a team of experts that are working there with you, I assume. So talk a little bit about how the evidence has come in and been helpful in shoring up your argument, and where you wish there had been more and you could have made a stronger argument. I'll start with you, Alix.
So, well, first of all, thank you for all the work you do. Thank you for doing this hard work and digging in deeply in these hard, complex questions. What I would say, I work a lot on the Hill, a lot, working with state legislators, all kinds of policymakers, and what is so important in these conversations is to demonstrate what is clear and what is not clear. I think what the tech companies have done very effectively is muddy the waters. Zuckerberg infamously, in the Senate hearing last year where he infamously stand up and apologized to parents for the things they felt, but nothing that he actually did, also talked about research. He cited scientific research that was later refuted the next day, I believe, by the APA. But the thing is that while I said earlier 90% of the population recognized there was a problem, these are complex issues. It is not as simple as you smoke a cigarette and you inhale it and therefore it causes cancer. And that took a long, long time for people to understand that that was problematic. And you could feel it, literally. In this scenario, these topics are so complicated that we need you to dig in deeper with things like design, to the most specific layers you can on the auto scroll, on this push notifications, anything that can really demonstrate and clarify this in a way that is important. So I think that's number one, is just continue what you're doing, really give us the most detailed stuff we can in a way that is understandable to the policymakers. So whenever I tell a lot of my PhD researcher friends and colleagues, like, look, give me that 50-page report, it's great, I will read it, but I need that 2-page executive summary. I need to get that 2-page executive summary I can hand to a lawmaker that really pops and hits and they understand precisely what's coming out of your research. And the last thing I'll say to the research community, what we really need from you all is we need you to think about funding and where it comes from. And I know this is a really hard time for researchers, so I say this with that humility and understanding, but I ask you not to take tech money, because there is a big problem when tech money is informing the research. And we've seen this time and again in all kinds of sectors, but and I say there aren't good tech companies out there, but I think the big social media companies in particular, the big tech, big six, they have very, very little credibility when it comes to this stuff, and they use it and they leverage it for their advantage. So I would ask that as well.
Imran, how about you? Where has it helped you to have evidence? Where have you wished there were more?
Well, I mean, we have about a third of our staff are actually researchers. So, we hire people who are either doctoral candidates or have completed their PhDs, data scientists, journalists, and we produce our own research, which helps. Our analysis from the beginning is we have no right to be listened to. I'm just some British guy who turned up in Washington. Like, I have no credibility, or there's no reason to listen to me. So we need to have good data points. So we have brilliant researchers who do the research, and then we have great storytellers that turn that data into a story. Fundamentally, research is about, a research paper is about conveying data points and findings really to an academic audience. They're written in a dry and abstruse way. And we have an incredible comms team that turns that into compelling information that can be communicated rapidly to normal audiences. It's like, take our research study, Deadly by Design. We set up accounts as 13-year-old girls in 4 different countries, the US, UK, Canada, and Australia on TikTok. We then recorded the For You feed, the first half hour, went back and looked at each of the videos, coded them, and we worked out that within 2.6 minutes of opening an account as a 13-year-old girl, TikTok starts serving you self-harm content. Within 8 minutes, eating disorder content. What do I mean by self-harm content? A video of a razor blade with the words, "I miss the touch of you on my skin," appearing around it, set to maudlin music. When we set up half the accounts with names like Susan and half the accounts with names like Susan Lose Weight to indicate vulnerability. Now, what would any one of us in this room do if a 13-year-old girl came up to us and showed signs of vulnerability or body dysmorphia? We'd be careful. We know that this person is vulnerable. It would trigger our instincts to protect, to love, to give them care. Not TikTok. TikTok served those accounts 12 times as much self-harm content in the first 30 minutes. So research and its ability to tell a compelling story that can make everyone in this room draw a breath and go, we have to do something about that. It is at the core of why we can not just say that we are right, but we can actually emotionally move people. Because fundamentally, we're not going to get change. There's no policy that we can magic up just by being right. That's not the way the world works. Policy is subservient to politics, and politics is subservient to culture. We need to get this data out there beyond this room to everyone in America. And if we could do that, if we had a way, the irony is that social media makes it very difficult to communicate to mass audiences these days. We don't have TV that everyone sits around and watches together. But if we could get it out there, I think that we could change the way that these companies are held accountable.
We're going to do Q&A in a few minutes, so researchers get ready to ask questions of the panelists, because I'm sure this is creating some responses in you. Gretchen, thoughts about where evidence has been helpful or not helpful to you in your work?
I mean, I would just like to say to this group that it's always helpful to have more, to have research in support of litigation, in support of civil litigation. There has been some fantastic research that has come out of, that helped with the legislation to ban TikTok that was later overturned by, or ignored really by President Trump, but fantastic academic research that convinced members of Congress to pass that law, with a very high percentage. I also want to just agree with what Alix said about the cynical way that the tech industry uses research they fund to distort what's actually going on. And there is a real need, a really crucial need for foundations and donors that are interested in changing the dynamic to put more money into that research and potentially put that money into research that is partnered with groups that are building litigation, because strategic litigation is going to be another key driver in this, and we're seeing that already in the United States and also in Europe.
So there are cases pending or traveling through the system in other countries as well as the United States, because we've heard about Section 230 and what a chilling, inhibiting effect that it has, but in other countries...
It's too bad that Matt's not here, because I was part of the group that put together the families that are now part of Neville v. Snap, a case that he's filing. That's a case that represents families who lost children to fentanyl tablets they bought over Snapchat. Amy Neville, one of the parents, is part of ACCO, so is Jaime Porta and Perla and Bridget and various other parents that are part of that. Those parents didn't think that they could sue, and I helped them find attorneys that would build that case as a dangerous product, as a defective product claim, as opposed to using 230 grounds. It took, I want to say 2 years of fighting Snap to have that case dismissed. And Snapchat is actually so freaking arrogant that they filed not just a motion to dismiss, they filed a motion for sanctions against the parents for having the nerve to bring a lawsuit against them because their kids were dead. That's how arrogant and obnoxious Snapchat is as a company. And they won that. Our families won that, and that case has just gone into discovery, I want to say in February. And so it's really one of the very first cases that will go into discovery. I believe Snap came to the families a few months ago and offered them some huge settlement, 20 million each or something like that. And the families effectively flipped them the bird and said, no, we're going to see you in court. So I'm really proud of them. These are families that are going out and essentially re-traumatizing themselves almost every day to fight this, to make sure the same thing doesn't happen to other kids, and to get that company held to account.
You've infused a huge amount of urgency and intensity into this conversation that we've started about policy and litigation and legislation. And I really appreciate that you've touched on some of the key components of this, from culture change to public will and demand to litigation to politics and money in politics. and how these things take time, but there are watershed moments, there are tipping point moments where we cross over from it being the problem of the aggrieved parent to all of our problem. It's all of our problem. And so the last question I'm going to ask you before we open it up to the audience is, if you had a magic wand and you could wave it, what would be the one thing you'd change to better protect kids online?
230.
230. Gretchen says 230.
230 reform is, we were quite happy that COSA almost passed, but we don't need COSA. We need an online safety act. It's not just children who are at risk. It is elderly people, it is LGBTQ communities, it is people of color, it is endangered animals. We need a law that protects everybody the way Europe and the UK have.
Great. How about you, Imran? Magic wand.
I mean, given Gretchen's already taken 230, I would say if there's one thing I wish every parent knew, it's that social media doesn't give your kids more of what they want. It gives them more of what the platform wants them to want. And that means that when your kids are seeing content flash up on their screens, they need to know it's not their fault. And they need to be able to have shame-free conversations with their parents. A symmetrical exchange of information where the kids are teaching their parents what they're seeing online. Because I'm 46. I can't use TikTok. My eyes are bad. It gives me a migraine. So I don't really know what happens on those. Well, I do know what happens on those platforms because I have 36 members of staff who tell me every day. But, you know, it's about having those symmetrical conversations where our kids are telling us what they're seeing online, and we're helping them to contextualize it. And I think that if parents were able to have those conversations and to have those shame-free, open conversations, I think that would help to mitigate some of the problems that social media creates, while we, Alix, Gretchen, myself, and lots of other people in this room that I can see here, are trying to fix the systemic problems that we have.
So we obviously haven't disagreed enough today for Kris's liking. So I'll take a different angle here, which is this. Right now, the technological paradigm we exist in, particularly with social media, but also when it comes to AI and a lot of the emerging technologies, I believe is not conducive with democracy, the system of democracy. I also believe is not conducive with the health and well-being of our children, and any possible future that is looking down this road, this trajectory, is not a good one. And for me, from the lens that I sit, where I sit, is the thing I would disaggregate and I could break apart is this myth that these are not products. This is about free speech. These are products. If in the same way that a toy that I buy for my 4-year-old, if this toy says it is okay for a 4+, and it hurts her because of a product dysfunction, or something wrong with the actual product, I can sue them. I can do a lot of things. And this goes back to 230, but it's much bigger. It's a paradigm that has to break. It's also, J.D. Vance is going to Europe to try to essentially pass that paradigm off and say, don't pass your laws in Europe because of this idea we have here, which is a complete fraud. So break apart the idea of free speech and product liability. It is about products, product liability, and product harms.
These were really good answers, and they were different from each other. Thank you for having different magic wands. That was amazing. Okay, so to speed up the Q&A, we don't have microphones for you to get in line, et cetera, et cetera. We're going full online, very automated approach, and I can see your questions here. So I'm going to go ahead, and I'm going to facilitate, and let's make the answers maybe more of a lightning round to the extent possible. So building off of the last question on the magic wand, there are people asking whether or not you think there's a way to create products that actually help kids, that actually facilitate their development, that make them make good use of their attention. And we don't all have to answer it. Anybody's welcome to jump in and try for that one.
I mean, if you look at the Chinese version of TikTok, you know, that's specifically designed to be edifying. It's specifically designed to help kids to understand maths problems and understand science and to encourage kids to do well at school. It just so happens that when the Chinese government or the Chinese company decides to deploy the same technology into our countries, it's there to addict them and teach them within 2.6 minutes that they should cut themselves. Isn't that funny?
Oh, you want to go ahead? No, go ahead.
First, I say that 100% agree. Sorry to not have more disagreement, but agree with Imran with one caveat that the Chinese version also very, very explicitly adds in a layer of propaganda to the mix of their educational model. But what I would say is that, you know, I'm not a technologist. I've met a lot of great technologists. Met one in the elevator coming down who's creating something new and different. I have other colleagues and people I've worked with who are the ones creating this. It is possible. It is very, I would say, possible and easier in a lot of ways to create stuff that helps make healthful, meaningful connections. And just hearing some of those awesome lightning rounds at the beginning, you see some very specific ways in which that can happen. It's all about the business model. So what really has to be destroyed is this business model. That is the core of the problem, and I believe that market incentives and market alternatives have to be created to really push that.
So a decommodified environment for children would solve all of our problems?
It can't be advertising based. Advertising requires maximal attention on that one platform. So they're competing for the attention of our kids, which means by definition, persuasive technology and addiction is the very heart of the way that their algorithms work. And if they didn't work that way, if the platforms were happy that kids only spent 3 minutes or 12 minutes or 15 minutes, depending on what their needs were, it would be different. If social media was a good place to get good information fast, it would make no money with advertising. Because if you went to social media, you found out the truth, you'd go and do something else. They need you to be confused. Yeah. They need you to be arguing. They need to present a world that's your own mini hell. And that's precisely how the algorithms work. I don't think we should be exposing our kids to that. I don't think we should be exposing anyone to it. Yeah. Because it's making us meaner. It's making our societies more brittle. It's undermining truth, science, and democracy, and our community cohesion. But let's start with our children, because they really don't have any resilience to these sorts of pressures.
What is the one research question that would give fuel to the policy you think would have the biggest impact? So we've talked a lot about 230. Maybe we could just have consensus on that if we could knock down 230, we'd be in a different policy environment. What research would you need for that to happen?
I think it would be helpful to have more research testing the addictive nature of the algorithms, in particular for kids, and the way that some of the things that we've described here, the way that self-harm and depressive content is served up and or sexualized content. One of the research studies I did in Europe involved avatars, boys and girls, similar to what Imran was talking about. And we had some of our boys interested in sex, and they were being served, you know, cam girls and, you know, online sex conversations within 20 minutes of us setting up account. These were 14-year-old. These were set up to be 12 and 14-year-old boys.
Mm-hmm. Can I just, and maybe this is where you're going to get a bit of grist in the oyster. More research is good, but more research is not necessary for us to take the actions that we require to protect children online.
Right.
The platforms, their bleat constantly is more research. We actually know everything we need to know that we have a crisis, that it's driven by these platforms, the way that they work, their business models, their algorithms, and the content they serve. And so action needs to be taken. And one of the things I've learned as someone who works in advocacy is it's not good enough being right. Like, we can be more right, we can find more research, we can be more certain, of course. But also, it's about the quality of the action that you take, the strength of the coalitions, the quality of your communications, and your ability to reach across both sides of a political divide in the United States and find spaces of agreement.
And I think on kids we did 91.3 on COSA, right? So one of the challenges, yes, we need more research, but it needs to be, just never forget, the most important thing about that research is not the act of doing it. It's not the accolades that you get from academics. It's about its ability to move people and move the debate and assist in what is now an enormous push for change.
Is that still true in a courtroom? Because I feel like there are different standards of truth. There are different thresholds of criteria. So I agree with what you just said in the sort of public square. But you go into the courtroom, you're sitting alone on a witness stand, you're holding yourself out as an expert. The companies are saying, prove it. Prove that my product is harming children. I want to know what you mean.
That's what discovery is
for as well. Is there more?
Well.
So are you even thinking in that setting we have, or is that yet to be determined?
I think that's what discovery is there for as well. And one of the things that we found, for example, I remember doing a piece of research called the Disinformation Dozen that showed that 12 individuals were responsible for 65% of the disinformation being shared during the pandemic on vaccines. Meta challenged it, said that we were lying. They went around, they hired academics to write papers saying that we were talking nonsense. Then Frances Haugen came out as a whistleblower, and on the very day that our report came out, they had an internal paper concluding the same thing. So sure, the truth is that there is actually aggressive action and litigation, the stuff that Matt's doing, the fact that he's found an innovative legal theory in order to actually get through to discovery and pass the motion to dismiss. In reality, that's a lot of research that we didn't have access to before.
But there's no one research question that will handle all of the different potential lawsuits that are out there, or even policy issues. But just to dovetail on what both Alix and Imran have said, we're trying very hard to focus people and bring our members and other parts of the community to focus on 230. What I've seen and what I'm frustrated by in the community is that we have family groups that are fighting suicide ideation, and we have groups that are fighting the online wildlife trade, and we have groups that are fighting the fentanyl issue, so there's like all of these electrons kind of buzzing around, and they're all doing important stuff, but they're all operating in silos. And what they don't realize is they're fighting the same freaking problem. The common denominator is the algorithms. It is the design of these systems. And until we can bring these constituencies under one umbrella and start fighting that problem, which is Section 230 and this liability shield that is effectively a gigantic subsidy to the tech industry, we're not going to get anywhere. We've got to get to that moment where, like, the Ghostbusters cross the streams, and then we can actually get somewhere.
Yeah, you are taking the conversation in the direction I'd hoped it would go, and I think where many arrows will point at the end of this Congress is leadership. Leadership, leadership, leadership. It's true, we're all fighting on different fields, with different teams for different reasons. But upstream is a shared vision of a safer world for kids. And we are not yet to a point, at least my observation is, where we are all under one tent, fighting together, rowing together. I think we're going to get there. I really feel incredibly optimistic. And we're pushing the research question because we're at a scientific congress. And these are people who have, in many ways, fueled this fight with their research, have led us to this point, and it is a jumping-off point. We are all fighting on different fronts, and I keep thinking of the parents you've talked about, Imran, the parents we've all met. There's a parent asking, what are they to do to protect their 10-year-old and their 7-year-old online? Still tonight, sitting here, that's a question that's really hard to answer. Because we've been living upstream in this conversation, but we all know that's because downstream there are parents right now asking, what do I do?
I have several thoughts on that. First of all, wait as long as you can to give them devices. Don't let them have those devices if you're not in the room, certainly while they're 7 and 10. Have a rule that they're only allowed on their devices in a common area of the house, and they can't take them up to their room. And the other thing is, if you're letting your child onto a new platform, set up an account of the age and gender of your child and use that platform for a week before you let your child on it. Because I can guarantee you would never let them on Snapchat or Instagram or TikTok if you saw what your children see every single day.
It's not just, though, the stuff that they're seeing. It's the stuff that others are seeing too.
Yeah, that's true.
When my daughter was 3 months old, she was sitting by my feet, and we just finished a piece of work looking at some really scary stuff. Incel forums, how the incels, this group of 30,000 men, were discussing whether or not it was okay to rape children, and they decided it was. They changed the rules of their forums. They changed it to you used to have a rule that you couldn't sexualize children. They removed the rule from the platform. And she was sitting at my feet. She's really cute. And I realized that there's a 1 in 2 chance that my daughter at some point in her life anyway will be hurt by a man, raped or sexually assaulted. And I realized that if any of these men were near her, that they would do the same to her. And I sobbed for 2 hours. And our young men are being inculcated with misogynist and violent rhetoric on a daily basis. And so it's not just about keeping our kids safe online, it's about ensuring that every kid's safe online. We have to, as Kris said, we have to operate as a movement. What's the one thing we can do? Is take an advocacy action. Do something. Sign up to, go to all of our research is free, by the way. Go to our website, sign up for our advocacy alerts at counterhate.com. Sign up to Alix's. Make sure that you're informed and make sure that you're out there advocating for it. Because this isn't just about our children. It's about ensuring that every child is safe online.
Final word, Alix.
So, final word for me is to keep in your minds the real-world implications of all of this. For me, it's on my desk. There's lots of pictures of my 2 beautiful daughters, Elsie and Beatrice, and there's a picture of Carson Bride, who lost his life due to suicide because of being harassed by a number of people on Snapchat anonymously. And I work with his mom, Kristen, who is one of the most incredible advocates that I've ever seen. I do not know how she can get up and tell that story day after day. But remember what this is really about, and remember what we're fighting against. And I think you're exactly right, Kristen, the way you articulated that earlier. The first rule of politics is self-interest, and we have to put our self-interest above ourselves in a lot of ways and go bigger. And I've been in conversations, some of which you sat in, Kris, where we've talked and tried to push people to go take their thinking up another level and say, let's go beyond the myopic focus of this specific thing, this specific bill. Let's think bigger. And it's hard. It's hard for people. So I would ask you to think bigger. And whatever it is that you do in this fight, think bigger and understand the real ramifications we're up against.
Final word, Gretchen.
I saw that you had one of the questions that we haven't had a chance to talk about was what are the implications for people in the global south, places like sub-Saharan Africa. And I want to say that from the very limited amount of funding we've had to do research and advocacy and educational work, in particular in sub-Saharan Africa, but also in the Indian subcontinent and also in large parts of Latin America, the landscape that children navigate in those parts of the world is way worse than even what we're seeing here. It is similar to Imran. I burst into tears at the end of my first training session in Tanzania because of the number of girls, very, very young, who came to me and showed examples of men who were inviting them to be models somewhere, and there was a clear pathway to try to essentially entrap young girls in Africa into sex slavery, and it was just heartbreaking to look at how prevalent it was.
Imran.
First of all, I just want to thank you, Kris, for your leadership on Kids Online Safety Act. I know that, and on this issue and bringing all these people together. I've been up for 20 hours now, so I'm flagging a little bit. But I do want to encourage people to know that there are people out there fighting this good fight and giving your support. You know, I know that Gretchen, Alix, and myself, we run organizations. We want to know what you're up to. We want to know what work you're doing, what research you're doing, find ways in which we can amplify your voices, in which we can have our, you know, at CCDH, our researchers work with yours, benefit from your knowledge, and perhaps exchange ideas as well. Because the richer methodological developments that we have for dealing with what is a novel environment in which social media platforms make it more and more difficult every day to research them. We know that, right? They're making it more difficult. Ways in which we can cooperate and which we can work together, learn from each other are valuable. And of course, to anyone else who's working in advocacy or other spaces, we're here to work with you. So I'm not going to stick around after this because I really need to go to bed. But if you want to get in touch, it's just imran@counterhate.com, and I'm really happy to speak further.
Thank you, all of you, Matthew, Alix, and Gretchen. What a great discussion.